Pick up a chicken breast at the grocery store, and you are holding a piece of one of the fastest growing animals ever produced by human hands. It looks unremarkable, pale, plump, uniform in shape, wrapped in plastic under fluorescent light. But that ordinary piece of meat represents one of the most radical biological transformations in the history of agriculture, and almost nobody thinks about it while tossing it into a cart. Here's the number that should stop you. The modern broiler chicken, the kind raised specifically for meat, reaches slaughter weight in about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. A human baby at 6 weeks old still cannot hold up its own head. A chicken at 6 weeks old is already being processed into the cutlets and nuggets sold at the store. This is not how chickens have ever behaved in the wild, and it is not how they behaved on farms. Even 80 years ago, something happened in the middle of the 20th century that fundamentally rewired what a chicken is. Most people assume this is a story about hormones. Ask someone why supermarket chicken is so big, so fast to grow, so cheap, and the answer you will almost always get is, it's pumped full of hormones. This is one of the most persistent food myths in modern agriculture, and it is almost entirely false. In the United States, the use of hormones and steroids in poultry has been illegal since the 1950s. Every package of chicken labeled hormone-free is making a claim that is legally true of essentially all chicken, because none of it contains added hormones in the first place. That label exists because it sounds reassuring, not because it distinguishes one product from another. So if it isn't hormones, what actually happened? The answer is something far more powerful and far more permanent than any injection. Selective breeding, executed with industrial precision over decades. This is not a story about chemistry. It is a story about genetics, math, and an economic engine that rewarded one trait above all others, generation after generation, until the animal itself was reshaped from the inside out. To understand the mechanism, it helps to think of a chicken's genome as a massive dial board, with thousands of dials controlling things like growth rate, muscle mass, bone density, appetite, and metabolism. In nature, evolution keeps most of these dials in a rough kind of balance. A wild bird that grew breast muscle too fast, without also growing stronger legs and a stronger heart to support that muscle, would simply die before reproducing. Natural selection quietly punishes imbalance. It filters out any animal whose body outpaces its own structural support. Selective breeding does something evolution would never do. On its own, it isolates a single dial and cranks it as far as it will go, while ignoring the consequences to every other dial. Starting in the 1940s and accelerating through the 1950s and 60s, poultry breeders began a systematic project. They took thousands of birds, measured how quickly each one gained weight, and bred only the fastest growing individuals with each other. Then they took the offspring, measured them again, and repeated the process. Generation after generation, they were not just fattening chickens. They were selecting for the specific genetic variants that controlled growth rate and muscle development, while paying no attention to whether the skeleton, the heart, or the lungs could keep pace. Think of it like a car manufacturer that only ever tests and upgrades the engine, decade after decade, while never once checking whether the brakes, the frame, or the tires have kept up. Eventually, you have a machine with a phenomenal engine, bolted onto a chassis that was never built to handle that kind of power. That is essentially what happened to the modern broiler chicken. Breast muscle, the most profitable and most demanded cut of meat, was pushed to grow at a rate that has been compared to a human toddler gaining the muscle mass of a grown bodybuilder in a matter of weeks. Meanwhile, the legs, the heart, and the lungs were left largely where they started, adequate for a bird a fraction of the size. The result is an animal with a genuinely strange relationship to its own body. Modern broilers often struggle to walk normally because their legs are not proportioned to support the muscle mass above them. Their hearts and lungs, sized for a much smaller ancestor, are frequently pushed close to their functional limits, just keeping the animal alive during its rapid growth phase. This is not the result of neglect or cruelty in any single decision. It is the accumulated outcome of thousands of small, rational choices, each one aimed at a single target: more meat, faster, for less money. Which brings us to the part of this story that explains why it happened at all. None of this was engineered out of malice or carelessness. It was engineered by economics, and understanding the cost-benefit logic makes the entire system click into place. In agriculture, the single most expensive input in raising any animal is feed. Every day an animal is alive, it is eating, and every bite of feed costs money. This is measured by an industry metric called the feed conversion ratio. Essentially, how many pounds of feed it takes to produce 1 pound of body weight. A lower ratio means a more efficient, more profitable animal. In the 1950s, a broiler chicken might have taken around 3 months to reach a market weight of a few pounds, consuming a large quantity of feed the entire time. Today's broiler reaches a significantly larger market weight in about 6 weeks, consuming dramatically less feed per pound of meat produced. Now multiply that efficiency gain across an industry that raises tens of billions of chickens every single year, shaving even a few days off the growth cycle, or improving the feed conversion ratio by a small percentage, translates into enormous savings at scale. A farmer or a processing company, operating on thin margins per bird, is not choosing between a natural chicken and a fast chicken as some kind of ethical preference. They are operating inside a global commodity market, where competitors are all racing toward the same efficiency targets, and falling behind on growth rate or feed conversion means literally being unable to compete on price. The system did not select for a fast-growing chicken because someone decided fast growth was good. It selected for a fast-growing chicken because the market punishes anyone who raises a slower one. This is the brutal logic underneath almost every "why does modern food look like this?" question. It is rarely about a single company's greed, and almost always about a system where thousands of independent actors are all responding rationally to the same economic pressure, and the accumulated result is something no single person would have designed if they sat down and planned it from scratch. To really appreciate how extreme this shift has been, it helps to look backward. Chickens were domesticated from wild jungle fowl in Southeast Asia thousands of years ago, originally valued as much for eggs, for cockfighting, and for their symbolic and ceremonial importance as for meat. For most of that long history, a chicken raised for the table looked and behaved much like its wild ancestors: lean, active, capable of walking, running, and foraging, reaching maturity over several months. Even in the early 20th century, in the United States, meat chickens were often simply retired egg-laying breeds, or dual-purpose birds, animals that were not specialized for rapid muscle growth at all. The shift toward a dedicated, purpose-built meat chicken really began to accelerate around World War II, driven partly by wartime meat shortages, and partly by new scientific understanding of genetics and nutrition. A famous industry competition in the late 1940s, sometimes called the Chicken of Tomorrow contest, explicitly set out to breed a bird with more breast meat, faster growth, and better feed efficiency, and the winning bloodlines from that competition became foundational to the modern poultry industry. What started as a contest became a template, and that template has been refined continuously for over 70 years. The difference between a chicken from 1950 and a chicken from today is not a minor variation within the same animal. Researchers who have compared birds from different eras, raising them side by side under identical conditions, have found that modern broilers grow to more than 4 times the body weight of their 1950s counterparts in a fraction of the time. That is not a gradual drift. That is a fundamentally different creature, produced by treating a living animal as an optimization problem, and then solving that problem with extraordinary technical success. Stepping back from the specific numbers, the story of the modern chicken is really a story about what happens when human intention takes over. From natural selection as the primary force shaping a species, evolution operates on a kind of blind, patient trial and error, testing traits against a complex environment, where survival requires balance across dozens of interacting systems at once. Selective breeding, especially at industrial scale, operates on a single, narrow instruction: optimize this one variable as fast as possible, and let everything else follow along as best it can. The chicken did not choose this path, obviously. It is simply the animal that happened to be economically central enough and biologically pliable enough for humans to redesign it almost completely within the span of a single human lifetime. In a strange way, the modern broiler is less a wild animal that humans have tamed, and more a kind of biological technology, an outcome shaped as deliberately as any piece of industrial machinery, just built out of muscle, bone, and feathers, instead of metal and circuitry. This pattern is not unique to chickens. It shows up wherever an organism becomes economically important enough to be optimized. In dairy, cows bred for milk yields their bodies can barely sustain. In salmon engineered to grow at multiples of their wild growth rate. In crops bred so heavily for yield and shelf life that flavor and nutritional density have quietly slipped. The chicken is simply one of the clearest, most visible examples, because the transformation happened so quickly, and the contrast with its wild ancestor is so stark. What the story ultimately reveals is not a villain and not a simple failure of ethics, but something more unsettling in its ordinariness: an entire industry driven by rational economic incentives incrementally reshaping a living species so thoroughly that the animal itself now exists almost entirely as a reflection of what the market rewards. The next time a chicken breast lands on a cutting board, it is worth remembering that it did not come from an animal evolution built. It came from an animal humans built, one efficient generation at a time, in pursuit of a number on a spreadsheet that most of the people eating the result will never see.